Alright, so now we know that we can get the text by using this e.target.value. But this is not really how we want to work with the text. So in practice, people do it a bit differently. So let's remove this. I'm going to save here. So now this onChange event handler function is empty. And if I now type here, you can see all of this still works. And this is actually called an uncontrolled text area. So in React, there is the concept of controlled inputs and uncontrolled inputs. So this one is uncontrolled. It's controlling itself essentially. So this text area in itself makes sure that when you type something that you actually see this here on the screen. Now in practice, what people do in React is they often make this a so-called controlled input or controlled text area, which means that we're going to use state to manage what we see here. So let's actually do that. So here, let's create a new state variable. And let's simply call that text. So you have these square brackets. And let's actually just start with useState here. So we're going to say useState. Right, so we have useState here. Now I need to import this. I can put my cursor here, do Option Escape on Mac or Control Spacebar on Windows. And then I can press Tab and it will import this from React. And then here I want to call that text. And then the setter function that can update that, let's call that setText. And then we can also specify an initial value for the text. So typically this would be an empty string, right? Initially there is nothing. Okay. And now what we can do on text area is we can actually also set the value here. So what we can say, for example, here in value, I can say test actually. So if I do this, if I save here, you can see now there is test here. If I change this to test 2332, if I save here, you can see now this is the text that's displayed here. So we can control the value of this text area with this value attribute here. So we don't want to make this random string. This should simply be this text here that we have. Okay, so let's do that. That's a JavaScript variable, so I'm going to use curly braces here. And I'm going to save here, and now it's going to be empty because remember, text here initially is an empty string. And that's what we set as the value here. So it's just going to be an empty string. Now, when you do this and now you try to type, you can see nothing actually happens because the value is always this text here. And this text variable is always an empty string right now, right? So even if you type something, well, it's not going to change anything because now what we see here is controlled by this text variable. So if we want to make sure that when you type something that this text variable also gets updated, well, here with useState, you get a setter function, right? setText. So here, when we type something, there is still a change event. So this function here will still run. So we need to make sure that when that event occurs, that we use this setText here to update this state variable, right? So let's actually go in here and let's see, oops. Yeah, let's go in here. So actually, I got a good suggestion there from Copilot. So what we can do here is we can still use that e.target.value, which will still give us whatever the user is attempting to type, right? So if I use the character T here, e.target.value will be T, right? So let me actually assign that to, let's say, a variable that we can call new text. So this is the new text that the user is attempting to write, right? So if I type the character R, the e.target.value will be the character R. I'm going to assign that here to new text, and that's what we want to set the text to be. We can then just say text, well, that should be new text. Okay, so it looks a bit complicated, but now if I type here, if I say the character R, you can see it actually displays here on the page. And so now if I just keep typing, you can see this works again. But now it's a so-called controlled text area or controlled input, meaning we are controlling what is being written here by using useState here. Instead of this text area managing that internally or the browser managing that, now we are controlling that here with text. We're setting the value to whatever that text variable may be, and we're updating that with setText. So we change this from an uncontrolled text area into a so-called controlled text area. This is very common when you work with these types of inputs, right? So input, it would work the exact same, right? So here we're using a text area because we have multiple lines, but it would work the exact same with an input. And the main benefit is essentially that it will become easier to deal with the text here, right? So a controlled text area or controlled input means that the value of it is driven by the React state. And the main benefit is essentially that it becomes easier to deal with the content of this text area. right? So for example, I can now also pass this text variable to some other component. Maybe I have some word spell check component and I want to pass the text to there as well. Well, now it's very easy, right? So now I can just pass this text variable like that, right? So as you'll see, it just makes it a bit easier to deal with the text, right? So just to quickly recap here, what actually happens initially here, the text variable is an empty string. So the initial render here of this text area, well, the initial value is going to be an empty string. So text here is going to be an empty string, and here it will return this text area with value, well, that's an empty string, right? So here I can just write empty string. That's what it's going to be. So initially, indeed, we see that's going to be an empty string. Okay, so let me undo that. And now what happens if I try to type something? So if I try to type the character A, let's say, as soon as I press that on my keyboard, what happens is there is a change event and we are hooking into that. We are telling the browser, hey, we want to run this function when that event occurs. So this function will be run. And here, when we look at the statements in the function body, we can see that we are getting the e.target.value. So this is what you are attempting to write, right? So as soon as you press a key on your keyboard, this function runs and it will give you access to whatever you attempt to write, right? And that's what we're assigning here to new text. And that's what we're setting the text state to be. Now, it was an empty string, but now when I type the character A, the text state changes. And when state changes, it will cause a so-called re-render, meaning everything in the function body here will run again, right? But this time text will be a string of A, right? So then everything here will run again. So now value will be A, right? And therefore, whatever you put as value here is what we actually see on the page. So now whenever you type, there will be a change event. We're getting the complete new text that the user is trying to create here. And that's what we're setting the text to be, which will be different than before. And therefore it will cause a re-render, which means everything here will run again, but now with the text variable being the up-to-date value, right? So now I type the character A. What if I now type B? As soon as I press the B, what happened here? There was a change event, and we have specified this function that we want to run when that event occurs. So that function will run, meaning the statements in the function body will run, which are these two. We only have two statements here. So we are using the event object that we get from the browser. E.target, that's the text area, and the value of the text area is basically what we are attempting to write at that point. Well, that's going to be the complete string there, right? So that's going to be AB, right? That's what happens here, and that's what we set the new text to be. And then here we use the setter function for the state, right? Now state was A before, text was still A at that point. So here we're changing it to AB, which means that the state has changed. And when state changes in React, it will cause a re-render of the component, as it's called, right? So let me do this, right? So here now text will be AB. That's what happened here, right? And now everything here will run with the new updated value for text. So text here will be AB. And whatever you put as value for the text area, that's what you will see on the page. And that's why we now see AB here. Right, so that's how everything works here now.